Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story.
Subscribe, like, and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I was standing near the back patio, sipping on a lukewarm beer and pretending to listen to the hum of conversations that buzzed around me like a swarm of well-dressed locusts. The smell of overcooked hot dogs and floral perfume hung thick in the air, mixing with the heat in a way that made my skin itch. It was Liam's graduation party, and everything was perfectly curated to look like a magazine spread. White balloons spelling out "Congrats" dangled above the pool. Fairy lights sparkled across the lawn like someone had dumped a Pinterest board on the hedges. And Denise was holding court like she was hosting a damn gala, not a backyard cookout in suburban Maryland. She wore a cream-colored wrap dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and her laugh had that sharp, artificial edge to it, the one she saved for when people were watching. Her voice cut through the noise, clear and confident, because Denise never said anything she didn't want the whole room to hear. "He's the only one who ever achieved anything in this family," she said, lifting her glass in Liam's direction. Her tone wasn't cruel, it was worse. It was casual, dismissive, like the words weren't loaded with 20 years of quiet fucking history. People clapped. They smiled. A few older relatives, second cousins, and folks I barely remembered laughed like it was a harmless joke. Liam, in his blue and gold graduation stole, shrugged and grinned like the golden boy he'd always been. He didn't even look over at me. My jaw clenched so hard my back teeth ached. I took another sip of the warm beer, let it sit on my tongue too long, and tried to swallow the taste of rust and bitterness that had nothing to do with the drink. You ever have one of those moments where something inside you just clicks? Like a tiny, invisible switch gets flipped, and suddenly, you're not in the room anymore. You're watching yourself from outside your own body, and everything slows down, gets quiet. That was me, standing on the grass, looking around at all these people who thought they knew my story, who smiled at Denise's comment like it wasn't a slap in the goddamn face. I'd known, deep down, that this day would come. That eventually, she'd say something like that out loud. She'd hinted at it for years, through snide remarks, backhanded compliments, and a million other tiny dismissals that stacked up until they formed a wall between us. But hearing her say it, so brazen, so damn proud of herself, was the final shove I didn't know I'd been waiting for. I reached into my jacket pocket, felt the manila envelope crinkle under my fingers. It wasn't heavy, not physically, but the weight of it, the years, the nights, the sacrifices, damn near broke my hand just pulling it out. I walked across the lawn, through the folding chairs and cheap buffet tables, while people turned their heads like they sensed something out of place. Denise saw me coming, and I swear to God, she looked annoyed. Like I was interrupting her moment. Her smile tightened, but she didn't say anything. I stopped right in front of her. No words. No fanfare. I held out the envelope, and when she didn't take it, I pressed it gently into her hand. I looked her dead in the eye, and then I walked away. No speeches. No fuck you monologue. Just silence. And maybe that's what made it hurt more, for her, for me, for everyone watching. Because silence, real silence, in a moment like that, it echoes louder than any scream. I walked straight through the side gate, got in my car, and sat there for a solid minute before starting the engine. My hands were shaking, but I wasn't angry. Not exactly. It was more like exhaustion. Like I'd finally stopped holding up a weight I'd been carrying for decades, and now my arms didn't know what to do. You ever spend your whole life trying to prove something to people who decided you weren't worth the trouble before you even opened your mouth? You ever realize too late that no matter how high you climb, they'll always find a way to pretend you're still in the dirt? What would you have done in my place? Would you have handed over the diploma, or just walked away and never looked back? Tell me in the comments. I want to know if I overreacted or if I waited too damn long. The drive home was quiet. No radio. No music. Just the hum of the road and the thoughts bouncing around my head like loose change in a dryer. I thought about my dad, how he didn't say anything when Denise made her little speech. He just looked down at his plate like maybe if he didn't make eye contact with anyone, it wouldn't count. I thought about all the times I'd tried. All the times I brought home report cards with nothing but A's, trophies from mathlete tournaments, even that time in undergrad when I published my first academic paper and sent him a link. Nothing. No response. Maybe a thumbs up emoji if I was lucky. And now here we were at the finish line, and I'd done it. I'd earned a PhD in applied physics. Top of my class. Published. Recruited by 2 federal research labs. I'd pushed through depression, burnout, and every mental crack you can imagine. And yet the only thing I got was a half-warm beer and a speech about Liam being the family's only success story. When I got home, I left the envelope on the kitchen counter. Opened a bottle of whiskey I'd been saving since graduation. Sat on the couch in the dark. Denise probably opened that envelope in front of everyone. Probably pretended to be shocked, maybe embarrassed. Maybe she even smiled that fake smile and said something like, "Well, look at that." Like my success had just now become real, because she finally had to see it in black and white. But I didn't stay to watch her reaction. I didn't need it. Not anymore. I was done performing for people who refused to clap. I didn't know it yet, but that wasn't the end. That was just the moment the mask cracked. Because what came next, the messages, the calls, the guilt, the damn unraveling, that's when the real story started. I was 12 the year my dad got remarried, and I remember the wedding not because it was beautiful or meaningful or even happy, but because I spent most of it sitting at the kids' table, eating cold chicken and wondering why no one asked if I wanted to be there. My dad wore a pale blue tie and a look on his face like he was trying to convince himself this was the right thing to do. Denise wore white, because of course she did, even though it was her second marriage, and she smiled through her teeth the whole ceremony like she'd just won something. Maybe she had. She shook my hand when they introduced us, like I was a junior associate joining the firm, and when my dad said, "This is Jake," she gave me a once-over and nodded like she was evaluating a used couch she wasn't sure would match the living room. That was our beginning, a handshake and a half-smile, and a quiet understanding that we would not be each other's favorite person. They moved fast. A new house in a different part of town, bigger, cleaner, with a granite kitchen and one of those gas fireplaces that never felt like it gave off real heat. My room was the one furthest from theirs, down the hallway and around the corner, like someone had deliberately designed the floor plan to keep me at a polite distance. There were no posters or toys waiting in the closet, just beige walls and a single desk lamp. Denise called it minimalist, but it felt more like temporary. 3 months after the wedding, she got pregnant. They were thrilled, and I tried to be. I really did. I smiled in the pictures, clapped at the gender reveal, and even helped paint the nursery. Soft yellow walls and little animal decals that made the place look like a damn catalog. Denise called it a fresh start, like my existence was the dust they were trying to sweep off the porch. Liam was born on a Wednesday, and from the second he showed up, the house shifted around him. My dad suddenly had energy again, always humming while making bottles or rocking him to sleep, and Denise looked at him like he'd just solved world hunger. They doted on him like he was royalty, like every sound he made was profound and every fart was a declaration of genius. I was expected to tiptoe. I was expected to understand. I was expected to be the big brother, not in the way that meant sharing snacks and tossing a football, but in the way that meant fading quietly into the background so the new show could take center stage. By the time I was 14, I had figured out my role in that house. I was the helper, the babysitter, the one who should know better. I wasn't rebellious or loud, and I didn't slam doors or sneak out like some of the kids at school. Instead, I chased perfection like it owed me something. Straight A's, science fairs, early morning chess tournaments, band rehearsals, I stacked my accomplishments like armor, thinking maybe if I shined bright enough, they'd have to notice. But Denise never really did. When I won first place at the county science fair, she didn't come. She said Liam had a dentist appointment and it wasn't fair to drag him across town. When I made the honor roll, she nodded and said, "Good. That's what you're supposed to do." And when I scored in the top 1% on the national placement test, she asked if I could watch Liam for a few hours because she had a spa emergency. I swear I didn't even know spas had emergencies. There was one day, and I remember it vividly, down to the smell of burnt toast and the sound of the dishwasher humming, when I made it to the final round of the National Youth Science Invitational. It was a big deal. TV crews. Judges from major universities. Even the governor was supposed to be there. I asked Denise if she could come. I said it really mattered to me. She looked up from her phone and said, "We'll see, Jake. I'm not promising anything." She didn't come. Dad didn't either. They sent me with a neighbor, Mrs. Gallagher, from across the street, who clapped so loud every time I spoke, I thought she might pop a blood vessel. I won second place out of hundreds of kids. Got a plaque and a check and a handshake from someone whose name was on a building. But when I got home, the living room was empty except for Liam's toys, and Denise had left a note on the counter that said, "Lasagna in the fridge. Hope you did well." I left the plaque on the mantel. Just placed it there, next to the wedding photo and the vase of fake flowers. It stayed for exactly one day. The next morning, it was gone. I found it on the bookshelf in the hallway, wedged between an old cookbook and a scented candle that smelled like regret. I asked Dad why it had been moved, and he didn't look at me when he said, "Let it go, son. Don't make a thing out of it." That sentence stuck with me like a splinter under the skin. Don't make a thing out of it. As if being erased wasn't already a thing. As if being invisible in your own home was something to swallow and forget. That was the moment I stopped trying to earn anything from Denise. I didn't stop achieving, I just stopped believing it would matter to her. I became a ghost in my own story, present but unacknowledged, floating through rooms that weren't mine and dinners where my voice never made it to the surface. And maybe that's the thing that messes with you the most, not hate, not screaming matches, not even outright rejection. It's the emptiness. The slow, deliberate absence of care. The feeling that you could disappear and no one would ask where you'd gone. It was the beginning of a pattern that would define every year that followed. And I didn't even know yet that the worst part wasn't being forgotten. It was still hoping, deep down, that maybe next time would be different. There was a moment, I think I was 15, when I stood in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, watching Liam spill juice all over the tile floor like it was his birthright to make messes and walk away from them. Denise didn't flinch, didn't scold, didn't even blink. She just laughed and grabbed a paper towel while Liam skipped out the back door to go ride his stupid bike in the driveway. I stayed quiet, as usual, cleaned up what was left behind, and told myself not to be petty, not to let it eat me alive. But the truth is, it already had started to, and it never really stopped. Liam was the kind of kid who had charm like currency, and he knew how to spend it. Teachers adored him even when he turned in half-finished homework or skipped class for the third time that week. Coaches made excuses for him, girls swarmed him, and our dad, who never said no to Denise and barely said yes to me, acted like Liam had walked out of a Norman Rockwell painting. There were photos of him in every hallway, every corner of the house, smiling with a crooked grin and that mop of sandy hair that looked effortless even when he rolled out of bed at noon. Meanwhile, I became the default adult before I even learned how to shave. I was the one Denise trusted to babysit, to fix Liam's broken laptop, to cover for him when he forgot his gym clothes or needed a forged signature on a late assignment. "You're the responsible one," she'd say, as if that was something I should have been proud of, like being the family's unpaid, unthanked safety net was some kind of honor. By 16, Liam had already failed his driver's test once, but that didn't stop Denise from handing him the keys to her silver Toyota the day after he finally passed. I still remember watching from the living room window as he peeled out of the driveway like he was in a movie, music blasting, middle finger in the air, just for fun. That car didn't last 6 weeks. He wrapped it around a light pole at 2 in the morning coming back from some party he shouldn't have been at in the first place. The pole was fine. The car wasn't. When I got to the hospital, because of course I was the one who showed up first, Liam had a few scratches, a mild concussion, and an expression that said he knew the rules didn't apply to him. Denise stormed into the room half an hour later, tears in her eyes, mascara running, and when she saw me standing beside the bed, you'd think I had been the one who wrecked the damn car. "This is why I told you to be a better influence," she said, voice tight with panic and something that looked to hell of a lot like blame. "You should have been watching him. He looks up to you, Jake." I didn't respond. I couldn't. There were a dozen things I could have said, all true, all of them cutting, but none that would have changed anything. So I just nodded like the good soldier I'd been trained to be and sat back down while they hugged like they were the only two people in the world. That was the year I started doing Liam's homework. Not because I wanted to, not because I was asked exactly, but because Denise made it clear in her thousand subtle, weaponized ways that it was my job to keep him afloat. "Just help him get through finals," she said once, while handing me his biology workbook. "He's not like you. He needs a little extra support." So, I became a ghostwriter for my brother's education. I wrote his essays. I solved his math problems. I even took an online test or two for him while he went out drinking or made out with girls in basements he couldn't remember the names of. He never said thank you. Not once. But he also never failed. And in that house, success, even borrowed, even stolen, was currency enough to stay the favorite. When I got my acceptance letter to MIT, I didn't tell them right away. I kept it in my drawer for 3 days, rereading it like I couldn't quite believe it was real. I'd worked for that moment my entire life. Late nights, summer classes, papers and projects, and sleepless weeks where the only person cheering me on was me. I imagined for a split second what it would feel like to see their faces, real pride, real joy, like maybe I'd finally cracked the code to being visible. I sat them down at dinner. Denise was on her second glass of wine. Liam was scrolling through his phone, legs up on the ottoman. My dad was reading something on his tablet, pretending not to be checked out. "I got in," I said, trying not to sound too eager. "MIT. Full ride." There was silence. Denise blinked. Dad looked up briefly, nodded. Liam didn't look up at all. "That's great, Jake," she said, then turned to Liam. "Did you text Aunt Maureen back about the lake trip?" That was it. No celebration. No clapping. No fucking balloon. Nothing. Just a pat on the head and a casual deflection, like I'd just told them I bought new socks. I took my plate into the kitchen, left it in the sink, and stood there for a while with my hands in the dishwater, trying to figure out if I was going to cry or laugh or scream. In the end, I did none of those things. I just dried my hands and went back to my room, sat on the floor with the acceptance letter in my lap, and stared at it like it belonged to someone else. That night, I realized something I'd been too scared to admit until then. I wasn't angry that they didn't celebrate me. I was angry that a part of me still wanted them to. I thought MIT would be the door that opened everything. I thought if I could just make it out, make it big, get my name on something that couldn't be ignored, then maybe, just maybe, they'd see me. But deep down, I knew the truth. Golden boys don't get replaced. They get protected. And the rest of us? We learn how to disappear so well that even our biggest wins echo back at us like silence. It was Christmas, which meant the house smelled like cinnamon candles and stress, and Denise had once again turned our living room into a photo backdrop straight out of a holiday home magazine. There were coordinated throw pillows with stupid sayings like "let it snow" and "cozy vibes only," and an expensive fake tree dripping in silver ornaments that Liam was never asked to help decorate. The whole place looked perfect, but it didn't feel like anything. Not to me, not anymore. That year, I had flown back from Boston for the holidays because my dad asked me to, not because I wanted to, and I think he knew it, even if he didn't say it out loud. I had been gone for over 3 years at that point, working my ass off through grad school, living off ramen and cold coffee, pushing past every mental wall that ever tried to stop me. And still, Every time I walked back into that house, it felt like I was shrinking into the version of myself they were more comfortable with, the one who knew his place, who didn't take up too much space at the table, who smiled and nodded and didn't expect a damn thing. That morning, I found a stack of printed newsletters on the counter, the kind Denise liked to send out to the extended family, the neighbors, her book club, and probably her goddamn hairdresser too. They were stapled and neatly folded, covered in glossy photos of Liam posing with his new truck, Denise holding up a glass of wine at some wine-tasting event, Dad asleep on the beach in Myrtle Beach. There were paragraphs about Liam's latest achievement, which was apparently organizing a tailgate party for his frat and getting most charismatic in some meaningless poll. There was even a section titled Family Highlights, where Denise gushed about their beautiful, thriving home, their amazing son, and all the joy 2020-something had brought into their lives. My name wasn't mentioned once. Not even in passing. Not even a goddamn footnote. I didn't say anything right away. I didn't throw the newsletter across the room, or storm out, or start yelling like I used to fantasize about. I just stood there, rereading the page like maybe I missed something, like there had to be some hidden sentence tucked between the lines that acknowledged I still existed. But there wasn't. I was air. I was static. I was the inconvenient shadow behind the golden boy glow. When I finally said something, calmly, respectfully, because even then I still hadn't unlearned the need to be palatable, Denise looked up from basting her overcooked turkey and blinked like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "Oh, come on, Jake," she said, waving her hand like I was a toddler throwing a tantrum over nothing. "Don't be so sensitive. It's just a silly letter." I stared at her for a second, stunned by how easy it was for her to dismiss me, how practiced it sounded, like she had a drawer full of ready-made excuses for every time I pointed out the obvious. "I'm not being sensitive," I said. "You just erased me." Again. That got a pause, a real one, like she hadn't expected me to push back. Dad shuffled awkwardly near the coffee pot, pretending to read a label like it was going to save him from having to pick a side. Liam was upstairs, blasting music, oblivious, or pretending to be. I wasn't sure which was worse. "You're being dramatic," she said finally, with that condescending tone she had mastered so well. "We didn't write about your brother's grades either. It's not personal." Except it always was personal. It had always been personal. I was the one they didn't talk about because talking about me meant admitting what they refused to see, that I had built a life from nothing, that I had climbed a mountain they never even bothered to look at. And they still couldn't be bothered to lift their eyes off Liam's Instagram stories long enough to notice. Every time I asked for acknowledgement, every time I brought up how I felt, I was gaslit into thinking it was my fault for feeling anything in the first place. "You take everything so seriously," Denise said later that day, when I tried to bring it up again, when I said stupidly, hopefully, that it kind of hurt to be left out. "Why can't you just enjoy being here?" But I couldn't enjoy being there, not when I felt like a damn intruder in the house I grew up in, not when every joke at dinner was about Liam, not when every story ended with "you should have seen what your brother did next," and not when Denise, in front of two neighbors and some distant cousin I barely knew, said with a smile, "Jake was always the quiet one." All that potential. Such a shame he never really figured out how to enjoy life. It was the kind of comment that sounded light-hearted if you didn't know the history, the kind that would have passed unnoticed if I hadn't heard that exact tone, that exact phrasing 100 times before. But I knew what it meant. It meant I didn't fit the mold. It meant I made people uncomfortable by existing too far outside the image they wanted to project. It meant that no matter how high I climbed, I was still the problem child because I didn't play along with the family myth. So I stood up, walked away from the table, and left the room without saying another word. Not because I couldn't defend myself, and not because I didn't want to burn the whole place down with the truth I'd been choking on for 20 years, but because I finally understood that there was nothing I could say that would make a dent in the fiction they'd built around themselves. They were never going to hear me. Not really. Not as I was. And in that silence, In the echo of my own footsteps down the hallway, something in me finally snapped free. I wasn't going to beg anymore. I wasn't going to explain myself. I was done trying to be grateful for scraps. The auditorium was nearly empty by the time I stepped outside into the harsh, early evening light, the kind that slices across your face like a blade when you've been sitting under fluorescent bulbs all day pretending to feel something. My hands still gripped the folder they gave me, that soft maroon cover embossed with the university seal, hiding the weight of 10 years of my life boiled down to one page of achievement. I stood at the edge of the stone steps and watched the crowd dissolve around me, families reuniting with shrieks and hugs, proud parents wrapping their arms around robed children who barely looked old enough to vote, camera shutters clicking like popcorn in every direction. I had no one waiting for me. No banner. No bouquet. No one holding a sign that said, "We're so proud of you, Jake." I didn't even get a goddamn text. I had asked once a few months back if anyone could make it. Just floated it out there in a family group chat that mostly existed for sending memes about Liam's fantasy football league or sharing photos of Denise's garden gnomes. I said the date, said the place, even offered to pay for their flights and hotel rooms if that was an issue, though I knew it wasn't. Denise replied with a thumbs up. Liam didn't reply at all. My dad said he'd see what he could do, which I already knew was code for "don't count on it." And so I stood alone, surrounded by the echo of cheers that didn't belong to me, and tried to summon some sense of satisfaction, some feeling of triumph, something that might make it all feel worth it. But the truth is, it didn't feel like anything. It felt hollow. Like running a marathon only to find the finish line was just another empty road. I walked across campus slowly, dodging clusters of families taking photos under cherry blossom trees, heading toward the small apartment I'd been renting for the last 2 years, the one where the heater never quite worked and the neighbors fought like it was a sport. I set the folder down on my desk, sat in the same chair where I'd written my dissertation on superconducting interfaces and nonlinear quantum dynamics, and stared at the degree like it might blink back at me. Eventually, I opened my laptop, stared at the cursor for a while, then typed out an email to my dad. Finished. PhD in applied physics. Hope you're well. That was it. 14 words. Clean. Detached. Like if I made it sound professional enough, it wouldn't hurt so much not to get a reply. I hit send and stared at the screen until the blue light made my eyes water. And then, 37 minutes later, not hours, not days, just long enough for me to think maybe he'd actually thought about it, a notification popped up. Graduation, 4 words. Proud of Liam today. That was it. No punctuation. No question. No mention of me, my work, my decade-long crawl through textbooks and research labs and sleepless nights that turned into weeks. Just that line, sitting there like a middle finger dressed in politeness, casual and cruel in equal measure. I didn't even get angry. Not at first. I just stared at the email and reread it again and again, thinking maybe I missed something, maybe it was a joke or a mistake or some weird automated reply. But it wasn't. It was deliberate. It was real. And it was exactly the kind of message that made you wonder whether you'd been deluding yourself your entire life thinking you were ever going to be seen. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of whiskey, the cheap kind, the kind that burns like betrayal, and sat back down. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even respond. Instead, I opened the envelope on the desk, pulled out my degree, and stared at it under the pale glow of a flickering desk lamp. It was beautiful in that boring institutional way, signed in ink by a university president I'd never met, declaring to the world that I had done the impossible. That I had, against all odds, made it. And yet somehow, in that moment, it felt like just another piece of paper. I folded it carefully, slid it into another envelope, a fresh one, clean and crisp, and sealed it without writing a name. No address. No note. Just the act of folding something sacred and tucking it away like a secret, like a wound you don't want anyone to see because they'll just call you dramatic for bleeding in the first place. I sat with that envelope in my lap for a long time, watching it, daring it to transform into something meaningful. It didn't. It just sat there, quiet and heavy and mute, like all the conversations I never had with my father, all the acknowledgments I never got from Denise, all the applause I never heard except in my own head. I thought about mailing it, about sending it without a word, letting them open it and choke on the realization that I had done the thing they said wasn't possible, the thing they never cared to understand. But I also thought about setting it on fire, watching it curl and blacken until all that effort, all that pain, was reduced to ash. Neither option felt satisfying. Neither one would fix what was already broken. So instead, I put it in the top drawer of my desk, slid it next to an old watch I never wore and a postcard from a friend who had since stopped calling, and I closed it. Not because it was over, not because I was at peace, but because I didn't know what else to do with it. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering what it says about a man when he achieves everything he dreamed of and still feels like a child begging for his father's attention. And the worst part? I still hadn't given up hope that he'd say something else. By the time the day of Liam's graduation party rolled around, I already knew exactly how it was going to unfold, not because I could predict the future, but because people like Denise never change their script when it keeps getting them the applause they crave. The whole damn thing had been telegraphed for weeks before I ever stepped into their backyard, the signs scattered across social media like breadcrumbs leading to the same tired performance they'd been putting on since Liam was old enough to spell his own name. The staged family portraits with everyone color-coordinated in blue and white, the caption about how proud they were of our boy and how much he'd overcome. As if scraping a passing GPA while throwing keg parties every weekend was some kind of personal Everest. The posts weren't just for friends and family. They were bait for validation, curated proof that they were the perfect suburban unit, that Denise had built something worthy of envy. And even though I knew better, even though I'd spent the last decade learning that expecting anything different from them was like trying to draw water from a bone-dry well, a small, stupid part of me still packed the envelope with my PhD certificate the night before, just in case. Not because I wanted to show off. Not because I needed anyone to tell me I'd done well, but because I wanted, somewhere deep in that cracked part of me I hate admitting still exists, for someone to notice. For my presence to mean something more than a head count. For someone, anyone, to say, "We're glad you came." I walked into the party carrying that envelope like a secret. It was tucked under my arm, the corners of the manila paper creased from how tightly I'd been holding it, like it might escape if I didn't keep control. Nobody greeted me at the entrance, and I wasn't surprised. Liam was already surrounded by a semicircle of laughing relatives, neighbors, and Denise's co-workers, all nodding along to some story he was telling about his wild senior prank, which probably involved vandalism and zero consequences. Dad stood off to the side, holding a plate he hadn't touched, smiling like someone who wasn't entirely sure if he belonged either. When he saw me, he nodded, but he didn't say anything. Didn't walk over. Just that hollow acknowledgement, the kind that doesn't mean much when you've been living off emotional crumbs your whole life. I found a quiet corner near the patio, half shaded by the pergola and out of the path of the party photographers. Yes, there were actual photographers, hired by Denise to capture the moment, as she put it in her Facebook post the day before. I watched for nearly an hour, sipping a drink I didn't really want, listening to conversations that danced dangerously close to parody. "Liam's going to change the world," someone said. "He's always been so gifted with people." Natural-born leader, another chimed in, while Liam stood with his crooked smile and nodded like he believed every word. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just listened. And maybe I would have kept listening. Maybe I would have stayed quiet, let the party wash over me, and walked away with my dignity intact if she hadn't said what she said. It was her voice, of course. Denise had a way of making sure she was always heard, even in a crowded room. She stood by the food table, wine in hand, laughing that sharp, practiced laugh, and then she said it. He's the only one who's ever done anything worthwhile. And the thing was, she didn't even say it with malice. She said it like it was fact, like it had never occurred to her that anyone else in that room, anyone else in that family, might have spent their entire life trying to do something that mattered. She said it in front of a dozen people and no one flinched. No one corrected her. No one even looked around to see if I'd heard. But I had. Of course I had. That was the moment. That was the spark. All the years of silence, of being the afterthought, the emotional custodian, the default babysitter, the good son who never caused trouble, it all cracked open like a fault line finally ready to split the earth. And I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I didn't make a speech or cause a scene. I just walked forward, steady and deliberate, the envelope in my hand like a quiet weapon. Denise turned, saw me approaching, and in that instant I saw something flicker behind her eyes, surprise, maybe, or recognition, or just the dawning awareness that this wasn't going to be her moment anymore. But she didn't say anything. She didn't move. She stood there, wine glass frozen midair, while I stopped in front of her and gently placed the envelope in her hand. No words, no smile, just that. And then I turned around and walked away. But just before I reached the gate, just before I stepped out of the curated fantasy they'd built for themselves, I glanced back. My dad was standing by the cooler, still holding that damn paper plate, and for the first time all evening, he looked at me, really looked at me. Our eyes locked, just for a second, and I waited. Waited for him to say something. For him to nod. For him to smile. For anything. But he didn't. He looked away. And just like that, the last piece of hope I'd been carrying, the belief that maybe, just maybe, he'd see me this time, crumbled into dust. I left the party not because I was angry, and not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because I finally understood that I was never going to get the thing I'd spent my entire life chasing. Not from them. Not ever. There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel like peace but punishment, the kind that doesn't comfort or heal but instead stretches out into every corner of your life like a slow, suffocating fog, and that's exactly what the weeks after the party felt like for me. I didn't block anyone. I didn't burn any bridges with fire or fury. I just stopped replying. I stopped answering texts that never came. I stopped checking the family group chat that went silent the moment I left the backyard. I deleted birthdays from my calendar, tossed the last family photo off my dresser, and let the emptiness roll in like a tide I didn't bother trying to stop. At first, I thought maybe someone would reach out right away. Not Denise, I knew better than to expect that, but maybe my dad. Maybe he'd pick up the phone and say something like, "Let's talk," or "I didn't know," or even the smallest goddamn whisper of, "I'm sorry." But the days turned into weeks and the silence stretched like a rubber band that never snapped. I waited longer than I'd like to admit, checking my inbox like a fool, jumping at every buzz from my phone as if it might be the message that cracked open the distance. It didn't come. Not until much later. Not until after fall had crept in and I'd buried myself back into my work, surrounded by numbers and algorithms that at least had the decency to follow logic and rules, unlike family, which seemed to run entirely on denial and revisionist history. It was sometime in November when I finally got the email. Short, cold, an afterthought dressed up in formality. It was just a misunderstanding, my father wrote, in a message so devoid of actual feeling it could have been generated by a machine. We didn't mean anything by it. Denise feels bad. Hope you're well. Just like that. A misfiring sentence or two trying to mop up decades of silence with the same lazy detachment that had always been his brand. No mention of the party. No acknowledgement of the certificate. No recognition of the weight I'd carried all those years. Just vague discomfort, and a closing line that sounded like it belonged at the end of an office memo. And then December rolled in with the kind of bitterness that sinks into your bones, and with it came the card. Glossy red and green, the kind you buy in a 10-pack from the grocery store, sent in an envelope with my name written in Denise's overly neat cursive. Inside, the usual printed message, something about joy and blessings, and below it, scribbled in a different pen, were the words, "We love you." 3 words, a lie by omission, and just vague enough to mean everything and nothing. There was no return address on the envelope, though I knew it by heart, and I didn't need to wonder how they felt when I didn't reply. I knew they'd assume I was being dramatic. I knew Denise would tell people I was always too emotional, too proud, too sensitive. The kid who never quite fit, who made everything harder than it needed to be. She'd turn it into another story, where she was the misunderstood stepmother who tried her best. But I didn't want to play a role in that story anymore. Still, one night, I don't know why I did it, and maybe I hate myself a little for it, I found myself driving past their neighborhood. It was late, the streets quiet, the houses glowing with the soft warmth of string lights and familiar rituals. I didn't mean to stop, but I did. I pulled over 2 houses down from theirs, parked under the same maple tree that dropped leaves like fire every October, and I got out. I walked up the sidewalk like a thief in my own past, stopping just before the front gate, and I stood there, watching through the living room window. Liam was on the couch, half laughing at something on the TV, and Denise walked in with a bowl of popcorn, handing it to him like she hadn't missed a beat. My dad sat in his chair, legs crossed, that same quiet presence he'd always been, and for a second, just a second, it looked like a picture from one of her newsletters. The perfect family. The people who'd built something that looked so whole from the outside, you'd never guess who was missing from the frame. They didn't know I was there. They didn't know I was watching. And I didn't want them to. I wasn't there to confront or demand or explain. I just wanted to see if anything had changed when I stepped out of the picture, and what I saw was a family that had simply rearranged itself, reshaped the hole I left into something neater, less complicated. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for the cold to creep in. Long enough to feel foolish for ever thinking I could matter to people who only wanted me on their terms. I turned around and left without a sound, got in my car, and didn't look back. The message came a week later. It wasn't from Denise. Not from my father. It was from Liam. "Can we talk?" he wrote. I didn't know it was like that. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't know what to do. Because I didn't hate him. I wanted to. God, it would have been easier to hate him. But he wasn't the villain. He was just the one they chose, the one they built the shrine around while I faded into wallpaper. But his message cracked something open, and I couldn't decide if it was hope or just more pain. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the keyboard, unsure if answering him would be healing or just another round of disappointment dressed up in a conversation. Because sometimes the worst damage isn't done by what people say. It's what they never bothered to say at all. When I finally agreed to meet Liam, it wasn't because I wanted closure or healing or some redemptive brother-to-brother moment where we cried over coffee and hugged it all out like a low-budget Hallmark special. It was because I needed to hear him say something, anything, that didn't come from a place of denial or oblivion or easy comfort. I didn't pick the kind of place where people bump into you with smiles or ask how your day is going. I chose a diner off the highway, the kind with cracked vinyl booths, bottomless coffee, and a jukebox that hadn't worked since the 90s. I got there early, ordered black coffee, and sat facing the window so I could see his car pull up before he saw me. He was late, of course, which somehow felt fitting. Still looked like the same golden kid, though a little softer around the edges, maybe not quite as shiny, like life had finally started to leave fingerprints on him. He walked in wearing a hoodie and a backward cap like he was still 20, and for a second, I wanted to get up and leave, to avoid what I knew was going to be an awkward, half-hearted attempt at reconciliation. But I didn't move. I waited. When he slid into the booth across from me, he didn't say hi right away. He looked nervous, not scared, not guilty exactly, but like a man who knew he was about to step into something deeper than he could swim in. After a long pause, he said, "Thanks for meeting me," and I nodded without responding, waiting for whatever came next. I didn't know it was that bad, he started, and I wanted to interrupt him right there. I wanted to say, "Of course you knew. Of course you fucking knew." But I let him talk. Because sometimes the hardest part isn't saying what you feel. It's listening to someone else try to unspool their own excuses, even when you already know how the story ends. I mean, he continued, I knew there was always something off. Like, I could feel it. You get that look sometimes, and I'd think, damn, I probably should say something. But then Denise would change the subject, or Dad would tell me to just let it go. It was easier to just not deal with it. He looked up at me, eyes searching, as if waiting for me to confirm that what he was admitting somehow made him brave. But all I saw was a boy who had been handed everything and never once stopped to ask who was paying for it. It's weird, he said, because growing up, I thought you were the strong one. Like, I knew Mom didn't treat you the same. And Dad, well, he just kind of coasted through everything. But you were always the one who had your shit together. You got the grades. You were quiet, but you were solid. And I figured, I don't know, that meant you were okay. I looked at him for a long time, longer than I probably should have, and when I finally spoke, my voice came out softer than I expected. I wasn't okay, I said. I was invisible. And after a while, that starts to feel worse than being hated. He nodded, but it was that slow, unsure kind of nod, the kind people do when they want to seem understanding but know they can never fully get it. I think I was a kid caught in the middle of something I didn't create, he said. They poured everything into me, man. Expectations, praise, pressure. I always felt like I was performing, like if I stopped being who they wanted, I'd lose it all. And for the first time, I saw it, not pity, not guilt, but truth. Not the full kind, not the painful kind I'd carried alone for years, but a sliver of it, real enough to let me see him not as the boy who got everything but as the boy who got a version of love that came with strings tied, so tight it probably strangled him too. I guess, I said, we were both stuck in different kinds of cages. Yours had gold bars. Mine didn't have a door. Neither of us laughed, though the metaphor begged for one. We just sat there in the silence that came after honesty, the kind that doesn't rush to fill the space, but lets it breathe. He offered to pay for the coffee, and I let him. It felt like a small win for him, like a way to tip the scale without saying too much. Outside, we stood near his car for a few more minutes, both pretending we didn't know this would probably be the last time we'd meet for a while, maybe ever. If you ever want to talk, he said, really talk, I'm here. I didn't promise I would. I just nodded once, turned, and walked back to my car. When I got home, I found another message from my father sitting in my inbox. I didn't open it. I didn't read it. I hovered over it for a second, feeling the old pull of habit, of hope, of that tiny, gnawing voice that whispered, maybe this time it'll be different. But I deleted it without reading. Then I stood in my office, staring at the degree on the wall, the one I used to think would prove everything, would mean something, would force them to finally see me. I pulled it down, slowly, the way you take down a picture of someone who died, not because you stopped loving them, but because the pain of remembering is louder than the comfort it once brought. I didn't throw it away. I didn't smash it. I just tucked it in the back of my closet, behind old boxes and forgotten coats, somewhere quiet and out of sight. Because that's where it belongs now, not as a trophy, not as proof, but as a reminder of what I built, of what I lost, and of what I'll never get back. I don't know if walking away made me free or just made me invisible all over again.